This is not the time for austerity. Canada entered this crisis in the best fiscal positions of its peers, and the government is using that fiscal firepower on things like the Canada Emergency Response Benefit and on the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, so that Canadians, businesses, and our entire economy have the support needed to weather the storm.
Governor General reading the speech from the throne in just about an hour. The Conservatives have already said, no, we will not support the speech from the throne. Don't like it, not good, waste of time. The Bloc Québécois leader tweeted criticism of it. That means, we don't know if he's going to support it or not, but the fate of the Liberal government may come down to one party, the NDP. But as leader Jagmeet Singh said just a couple minutes ago, they need to see two key things to support the speech from the throne. The Liberals have to bring back the CERB, which runs out this month, and bring in paid sick leave. They've promised to do that, but didn't mention it in the speech from the throne. So what's going on there? Let's find out. Jagmeet Singh joins us now from Ottawa. Mr. Singh, always a pleasure to see you and have you on the program. To be candid, I was trying to make sense of what you're trying to say. The Liberals took 6 weeks. They prorogued Parliament. They consult everyone. They put out their document. They clearly are not going to extend the CERB according to the speech from the throne. They're going to transition to an EI program, an expanded EI, and they didn't say anything about paid sick leave. So are we to assume that if you don't see those two things, you are not going to vote for the speech from the throne?
Well, I want to put in the positive, Evan. We know that in just 4 days, people are going to lose their support from CERB. And I'm not particular about what that support is called, but I'm very concerned about the amount of that support. It cannot be the case that while we're seeing numbers increase and a second wave, that the Liberals cut the amount of help that people receive, that families receive. So what we're saying very clearly is the throne speech, words on paper, we're not surprised that they said some nice words, but we're concerned that their first action that they're going to take, the first proposal they told us in the summer they're going to take, now that Parliament is resumed, is to put in place legislation that's going to cut the amount of money that families receive who cannot go back to work. So we're saying if they want our support, two things. To receive our support, to pass this legislation, we need to see the same amount of support. I'm not concerned about what it's called, but I want to see the amount remain the same as it has been in the past, and paid sick leave. If those two things happen, the government's got time to do that. If the government presents that, then we can look at the throne speech through that lens, and then we can make an evaluation that the words are not just empty words, but then we've seen some action that's concrete to help people.
Okay, so you're saying it doesn't have to be called the CERB, they have to expand the EI, but the amount's the red line. Just on the paid sick leave, that's provincial jurisdiction. What kind of promise would work for you? They've already said they're interested in paid sick leave. Employers may not want it. There's all sorts of ways to do that. It's provincial jurisdiction. How do you expect in the next 48 hours to get a promise on paid sick leave that will be enough for you to vote for it?
Well, we've seen a proposal in the past that in the summer that talked about bringing that into light in a legislation form. Want to be clear, this is a commitment that the Liberals made to us in order for us to support an important vote in the summer. And it's been months and months, and we still haven't seen that paid sick leave. There's many ways to deliver it. We could use a modified form of EI. It could be a modified form of CERB. There's many ways for the federal government to deliver it. And it's not a time to be using jurisdiction as an excuse. There are lots of tools that the federal government has to put in place a basic thing that any Canadian worker that is sick, that is worried that they have COVID-19, should not be going into work. And that's something vital in a pandemic. If every Canadian worker knew they could remain at home if they've got any symptoms, if they're feeling sick, if they could stay at home and get paid and have their bills paid and make sure that they're covered on that sick pay, then we would be in a much better position to fight the COVID-19 pandemic that we're faced with.
Okay, okay, that's interesting. And that could come in EI too. So essentially you're saying both paid sick leave and the CERB would all be rolled in this new, robust, enhanced EI. So, okay, that's interesting. But let's say they don't do that in the next 24 hours or 48 hours. That means for you to vote against the speech from the throne, you're the leader of the NDP, you'd have to vote against something that promises to extend the wage subsidy until next summer. That's a $70 billion promise. You'd have to be voting against a promise for essentially national child care program. You'd have to vote against expanding the Canadian Emergency Business Account. Are you actually prepared to vote against those things?
Well, here's the thing. These are just words on paper. Last throne speech, the Liberal government said they were going to bring in pharmacare.
To be fair, those
are people better off? They said they were going to bring in dental care. Those are just words. These aren't commitments unless we see legislation. So for us to evaluate those words, what do we have to go by? Well, the first action they're taking, the first action of this Parliament, based on what they told us in the summer, the first action they're going to take is to cut the help that families receive. 4 days from now, families are going to receive less help. Those that cannot go back to work, those that have been shut out of work because of COVID-19, they're going to receive less help. So at the same time, the Liberal government saying we're going to do all these great things, promising to do them, what they're actually doing is going to cut the amount of money that families receive that can't go back to work. How could I believe those words? And so I'm saying, let's test if the words match up with the actions and bring in place the paid sick leave that you promised to New Democrats. More importantly, you promised to Canadians months ago. Make sure you don't cut the amount of help that people receive while numbers are increasing in a second wave. If they do that, if they put forward a commitment in legislation to do that, then it would allow us to look at the throne speech through a different lens. Right now, it just looks like a bunch of empty promises. And we need to be able to have some confidence that some of these things are going to happen.
So, but you know, speech from the thrones, they never have legislation attached to them. That usually comes after with legislation. That may come with a fiscal update. Speech from the throne is usually a vision document. So I'm just trying to parse what you're saying. There still will be a vote on the speech from the throne, possibly in 2 days. I doubt they're going to have time to draft legislation to talk about those two things that you've talked about. Are you saying, look, if they make the nice words, they say more pretty words about this, I'm actually going to wait to see what they bring forward in terms of legislation, or wait till there's a fiscal update? Or are you just going to give them 48 hours until the vote on the speech from the throne?
Well, first off, with the vote on the speech from the throne, that could happen at any time. The last time it happened months after they gave the speech itself. So it's not necessary that that vote's going to happen right away. That's the first thing. And secondly, we're just 4 days away from CERB ending. Millions of Canadians are not going to have the same amount of help, and there's millions of Canadians that aren't going to have any help. Like, let's deal with that. That's an immediate, urgent thing. That's not something that can be put off. And absolutely, this is the wrong way for the government to do it. They should have provided us with a path forward. Those families, those Canadians that don't have a job, they should have provided a path forward months ago. Absolutely, they should have. Why did they wait till the last minute? Well, it's because the Liberal government prorogued Parliament. We had a date to sit in August where we could have dealt with some of these things. Now we're 4 days away, and there's millions of Canadians that do not know what's going to happen in their future. They do not know how they're going to make ends meet because their jobs in the service sector, in the tourism sector, in the hospitality sector are simply not there. For those millions of Canadians, they're now wondering what's going to happen. Obviously, the Liberal government has to act. And I don't understand why they're waiting so long and making these folks wait. It's cruel to do that to them. But in 4 days, they're not going to have any support, and they don't have a job to go back to. So yes, that's a priority for me because people are worried, and I'm worried about them. I want to fight for them.
Okay, so we'll find out. Maybe Mr. Singh's vote is contingent upon the extension of the CERB and not a transition to EI, or maybe it's a different title. Mr. Singh, by the way, I look forward to speaking to you on Sunday on the CTV question period as well. As we get ever closer, I always appreciate your time, sir. Thanks.
Thank you so much.